Dorothy Calloway drove the butcher knife straight through Harrison Beckett's contract and pinned it to her counter. "There's your answer," she said. Beckett stared at the blade still quivering in the wood. The entire diner went silent. 12 men, not one of them breathing. "Mrs. Calloway, you come back to my place one more time," Dottie said, "and the next thing I pin to this counter won't be paper." Beckett picked up his hat. His smile never moved. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "I already regret the coffee I wasted on you," she said. "Now get out of my diner." If this story moves something in you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Dorothy all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all truly began. Redstone Crossing, Wyoming Territory. October 1882. It started with a contract and ended with a knife. And in between was the kind of morning that Dorothy Calloway would spend the rest of her life trying to explain to people who hadn't been there to see it. But that was later. First came the ordinary part, which is how trouble always arrives, dressed like a Tuesday. Dottie was behind the counter at 4:30 in the morning when she heard boots on her porch. Heavy, deliberate, the boots of a man who wanted you to hear him coming. She didn't look up from the biscuit dough. "We're not open," she said. "Sign says 5 o'clock. The voice came through the door, smooth as river water over flat stone. "It's nearly that." "Nearly isn't 5. A pause, then, "I've ridden from Denver, Mrs. Calloway. 14 hours. I believe I've earned 5 minutes. Dottie pressed her knuckles into the dough. "Door's unlocked," she said. "Coffee's on the stove. Touched nothing else." The man who walked in was named Harrison Beckett, and he wore the particular expression of someone who had never once in his adult life been told no, and assumed today would be no different. His suit cost more than her flour supply for the winter. His boots were clean, in a way that said he'd had someone else clean them. He sat at the counter. He folded his hands. "Your land," he said, "sits directly in the path of the Union Pacific's planned extension. I represent a group of investors who are prepared to offer you $800 for the property, the building, and the business rights. It is a generous offer, Mrs. Calloway, and it won't remain open indefinitely." Dottie flattened the dough with her palm. "That's so." "The railroad will come regardless of who owns this property. The question is simply whether you profit from it, or whether you're relocated without compensation when the survey is finalized." "Relocated," she said. "It's standard practice." Dottie looked up for the first time. "Mr. Beckett, my husband built this counter with his own hands. He hauled the boards 40 miles in a borrowed wagon. He died of fever 2 winters after we opened, and I have been running this place every single day since, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, for 4 years. She held his gaze. $800. "It's a fare, it's an insult," she said, "and you know it." Beckett reached into his jacket and produced a folded document, placing it on the counter between them, with the careful precision of a man laying down a winning card. "Read it over. Sleep on it. I'll come back tomorrow for your answer." "I'll give you my answer now." Dottie drove the butcher knife through the contract and into the counter in one clean motion. The room went silent. Behind her, Eli appeared in the kitchen doorway, 8 years old, and holding a cast-iron pan he clearly intended to use if necessary. She gave him a look. He lowered the pan but did not put it down. Beckett stared at the knife. The muscle in his jaw twitched once. Then his smile returned, carefully, the way you'd replace a painting on a wall after an earthquake. "You'll regret this," he said. "I already regret the coffee I wasted on you," Dottie said. "Now get out of my diner." He left without touching his coffee. The door swung shut. 12 pairs of eyes turned to Dottie. "Breakfast is in 20 minutes," she said. "Anybody who's got a comment about what just happened can wait outside until then." Nobody had a comment. Eli set the cast-iron pan on the stovetop with great deliberateness. "Mama," he said. "I know. That was the man from the hotel, the one who's been asking questions about us." Dottie stopped. She turned to look at her son fully. "What questions?" "Tommy Briggs's pa works at the hotel. He told Tommy that the man in room 4 has been asking about you for 2 weeks. Who owns the building? Whether it's mortgaged? How much business you do on a slow day?" Eli looked at her with those eyes that always saw too much. "He wasn't here about a business deal, Mama. He already knew everything before he walked in." Dottie pulled the knife out of the counter. She wiped it clean on her apron. "You're sure about this?" she said. "Tommy's pa heard him talking to another man in the hall 3 nights ago. He said your name. He said—" Eli hesitated. "Tell me." "He said, 'A woman alone with a child and a mortgage is a problem that solves itself.'" The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. "All right," Dottie said. "Go finish the wood." "Mama, Eli," she turned to him, "I need you to hear me carefully. What that man thinks about us is his problem. What we do next is ours. Go finish the wood, and let me think." Eli went. She heard the back door, then the first crack of the axe, steady and unchanged. She stood at her counter and thought. She was still thinking when the bell above the door rang at 7:30, and she looked up, and Marshal Caleb Harding walked in. Which was Thursday, which was when he always came, which meant nothing, except that Dottie had not once in 4 years needed to check the calendar to know he was coming. He sat at the end of the counter. He put his hat on the stool beside him. He looked at the knife mark in the wood, and then at Dottie, and then at his hands. "Rough morning?" he said. "Average," she said, and set his coffee down. He wrapped both hands around the cup the way he always did, and Dottie had long ago stopped asking herself why she noticed that particular habit and simply accepted that she did. 4 years of Thursdays, 4 years of corn chowder and black coffee, and 45 minutes of the particular silence that somehow said more than most people's conversations. "Harrison Beckett was here," she said. Caleb didn't look up. "I know. I passed his horse outside the hotel this morning. Recognize the brand?" He turned the cup in his hands. "What did he want?" "To buy my land, $800. "And?" I put a knife through his paperwork. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said. Dottie leaned both hands on the counter. "You know him." "I know what he does." He looked up then, and there it was, the thing behind his eyes that he always closed off a half-second too late, like a lamp being shuttered from the inside. 3 women in the past 2 years sold property to Beckett at a loss. 1 left the territory entirely. He paused. The other 2 had accidents, the kind that don't leave evidence. "Caleb?" She used his given name without thinking, the way you use a name when what you really mean is, pay attention. "My son told me Beckett has been watching this place for 2 weeks. He already knew everything before he made the offer." Caleb set down his cup. "How does Eli know that?" "Because my son talks to people I don't think to ask." She straightened. "The offer isn't the point, is it? He already knows I won't sell." "No," Caleb said. "The offer was the first step. When you refuse, he moves to the second." "Which is what?" "He makes staying harder than leaving." He held her gaze. "Supply problems. Suddenly your flour order doesn't arrive. Your coal supplier finds a reason to cancel. Small things, one at a time, until the math stops working, and you decide on your own that it's time to go." "And if I don't decide on my own?" He was quiet for a beat too long. "Then it stops being small things." The bell above the door rang before she could answer. Pearl McAllister came in fast and stopped hard when she saw Caleb at the counter. The color left her face in one clean sweep. "I can come back." "No," Dottie said. "Sit down, Pearl." Pearl's eyes moved to Caleb. He looked at her steadily, the way he looked at everything, measuring without judgment. Something passed between them that Dottie couldn't read. "I work for Beckett," Pearl said. She was still standing, still close to the door. "I need you to know that before I say anything else." "I know," Dottie said. "Sit down." Pearl sat. Her hands went to her lap. "He sent me here a week ago to get friendly with you, make you trust me, feed you stories about the women who sold to him, how they came out ahead, how it wasn't so bad." She looked at the counter. "I haven't done it yet. I kept finding reasons to put it off." She swallowed. "He asked me this morning why you still don't know those women's names. I'm running out of reasons." "What else?" Dottie said. "He has a man watching your supply orders. He knows your reserves at the bank. He knows your coal delivery schedule and your flour contracts." She paused. "And he lied to you about the railroad survey. The easement doesn't go 200 yards north of here. It goes directly under your foundation. If you don't sell, his entire land contract for this territory collapses." She finally looked up. "You're not an obstacle to him, Mrs. Calloway. You are the entire problem he needs to make disappear." Caleb had gone very still at the end of the counter. "Pearl," he said quietly, "how long have you worked for Beckett?" 8 months. "And before today, had you ever told anyone what you just told Mrs. Calloway?" Pearl shook her head. "Why today?" Pearl pressed her lips together. For a moment she looked very young and very tired in equal measure. "Because my mother had a friend," she said, "in a town called Clearwater, north of here. Beckett went through there 3 years ago. She had a dress shop. She had a daughter. She didn't have anyone to warn her." She looked at Dottie. "You were kind to me when I had no reason to expect kindness. That's not a common thing, Mrs. Calloway. I'm not going to be the reason it gets buried." Dottie looked at Pearl for a long moment. Then she picked up the coffee pot and poured her a cup without being asked. "Can you go back to work tomorrow," Dottie said, "and make him believe this conversation never happened?" Pearl blinked. Yes, I can do that." "Then here's what I need from you. Go to work. Open his lunch counter across the road when he tells you to. Smile at customers. Do everything he hired you to do." Dottie leaned forward. "And every single thing you see or hear, you bring to me. Times, names, anyone he meets with, anything he sends or receives. Can you do that?" Pearl stared at her. "You want me to spy on him?" "I want you to be exactly what he thinks you are," Dottie said, "until I know enough to finish this on my terms instead of his." Pearl picked up the coffee cup and held it in both hands, the way people hold on to things when they need something solid. "What if he finds out?" "He won't find out," Caleb said from the end of the counter, "because I'm going to make sure of it." He stood and put on his hat. He looked at Pearl with the direct, unadorned steadiness that Dottie had spent 4 years cataloging without meaning to. "You did the right thing coming here. Don't lose your nerve now." Pearl nodded once, hard. Caleb left 2 quarters on the counter, twice as usual, which meant something or nothing. Dottie couldn't decide which. He put on his hat. At the door, he stopped without turning around, the way he always stopped without turning around. "Mrs. Calloway." "Marshall." "Tonight, before dark, you bolt your back door, the one by the woodpile." A pause. "And if anything changes before Sunday, send Eli to the jail, not to me directly, understand?" "Why not directly?" "Because Beckett has someone watching this building," he said, "and I'd rather he not know how much I know about what he's planning. The door closed. Pearl let out a breath like she'd been holding it since she walked in. "Is he always like that?" she said. "Like what?" Dottie said. Like a door that's locked from both sides." Dottie was quiet for a moment. 4 years, she said. Every Thursday. Never missed once. Pearl looked at her carefully. "And you have no idea why he keeps coming back?" It wasn't a question. Dottie picked up a rag and wiped down the counter and said nothing, which was itself an answer. After Pearl left, Eli came back in from the woodpile with sawdust in his hair and the particular expression he got when he'd been thinking hard about something that wasn't his business and had decided to make it his business anyway. "That was the lady from Beckett's place," he said. "Yes? Are we trusting her?" Dottie considered this seriously, the way Eli's questions always deserve to be considered. "We're using her," she said. "Trusting comes later if she earns it." Eli nodded, processing. "What about Marshall Harding?" Dottie kept her eyes on the counter. "What about him?" "Tommy Briggs says the marshal's been riding past our place every night for 2 years. After closing. Just rides past slow and keeps going." Eli watched her face with those quiet eyes. "Tommy's pa sees him from the hotel window. Says he's out there in all weather, rain, snow, doesn't matter." Dottie's hands went still on the counter. "Every night?" she said. "Every night," Eli said. "Tommy's pa says he's got a name for it. Says the whole hotel staff calls it the Marshal's Round." Eli tilted his head. "But his regular patrol doesn't come this direction, Mama. I checked the schedule they post outside the jail. This way isn't on it." The kitchen was very quiet. Dottie looked at her son for a long moment. Then she looked at the door Caleb had walked out of. Then at the knife mark in the wood of her counter, still clean and sharp and exact. "Go wash up," she said. "Lunch crowd's in an hour." Eli went. Dottie moved to the hook where she hung her apron at the end of each night. The hook just to the left of the back door. The one her husband James had put up crooked, and she'd never straightened, because she liked it crooked, because it was one of the last things his hands had touched in this building. She reached for the apron. She found the envelope instead. It had been tucked behind the hook, thin and plain, sealed with no marking except her name on the front, in handwriting she did not recognize. She turned it over twice. No return address, no date on the outside. She broke the seal. Inside was a single folded page. She opened it and looked at the date written at the top, and something in her chest stopped moving for a full 3 seconds. October 14th, 1878. 4 years ago. 1 week, one single week, after Caleb Harding first sat down at the end of her counter and ordered corn chowder without looking at her, and left 40 cents for a 20-cent meal, and walked out without a word. Her eyes dropped to the first line. "Mrs. Calloway," it read, "I don't expect you to ever read this. I'm not sure I intend for you to. But I watched you today, and I have to put it somewhere, or I think I'll carry it until it breaks something important." Her hands were steady for the first line. They were not steady by the last. "I have been a man who stopped believing certain things were still possible for him. I came to your diner because I was hungry and it was close. I kept coming back because of what I saw when you didn't know anyone was watching. The way you slipped an extra biscuit under the widow Dalton's napkin when she wasn't looking, and pretended not to. The way you told that miner his money was no good today when he came in with his hand bandaged and couldn't afford a full plate. You did not do these things for anyone to see. That is exactly why I cannot stop thinking about them. I won't tell you this. I don't have the right. But God help me, Dorothy Calloway. I have been watching you take care of this entire town for 3 weeks. and I think you may be the bravest person in it. And nobody has told you that. And it seems to me like a serious wrong that wants correcting. Yours in silence, C. Harding. Dottie stood in her kitchen in the October morning and read the letter 3 times. Outside, Eli was restacking wood. Down the road, Harrison Beckett was in his hotel room with clean boots and a plan already in motion. And 4 years ago, on a Thursday morning in October, a man who rode past her window every single night had sat at the end of her counter and written down what he could not say out loud, and then carried it in his pocket for 1,460 days without leaving it. She folded the letter along its original crease. She pressed it once against her chest. Then she put it in her apron pocket, straightened her spine, and went to start the lunch bread, because trouble was coming, and she intended to meet it on a full stomach. She did not sleep that night. Not because of Beckett, though Beckett was there in the back of her mind, steady and cold like a stone in a boot. Not because of Pearl, or the survey, or the $800 that was really a threat wearing the costume of an offer. She didn't sleep because of a letter written 4 years ago by a man who had been riding past her window every single night since and had never once said a word about it. And she did not know what to do with that information, except carry it around all night, like a coal that hadn't decided yet whether it was going to warm her or burn her. At 3 in the morning, she got up and made bread. At 4:30, Eli appeared in the kitchen doorway in his socks, hair standing in 4 directions, and looked at the 3 finished loaves on the counter, and then at his mother. "You only bake that much when something's wrong," he said. "Go back to bed." "There's a man on the road," he said. "Same one as last night. I saw him from my window." Dottie's hands went still in the dough. "Don't," she said. "I'm just telling you what I saw." "I know what you saw. Go back to bed, Eli." He went. She heard his feet on the stairs, slow and reluctant, the particular retreat of a child who knows he's been dismissed and disagrees with it. She waited until she heard his door close. Then she walked to the front window and looked out at the dark road. He was already gone. She stood there for a moment, with flour on her hands and the letter in her apron pocket, and the particular feeling of a woman who has been alone for a long time and has made a system out of it, and who is now standing at the edge of that system, looking at a drop she cannot measure. Then she went back to the bread, because the bread, at least, she understood. The supply problem started on Friday. Her flour order from Connolly's mill was supposed to arrive by noon. By 3 o'clock, it hadn't come. She sent Eli to the telegraph office and got back a message that read, "Order delayed. Unforeseen circumstances. New delivery date, TBD." No signature. She stood in her kitchen with that telegram and breathed through her nose for a count of 10. Then she walked across the road to Gentry's general store, bought every sack of flour Gentry had on hand, loaded them into her wheelbarrow herself, and was back behind her counter before the dinner crowd arrived. She charged 10 cents more per biscuit, and every single one of her regulars paid it without a word, because they knew Dorothy Calloway well enough to know the price change meant something had happened, and asking about it would not be welcome. Caleb came in at 6, which was not Thursday, which meant he'd heard something. He sat at the counter and looked at the flour sacks stacked against the back wall, and then at Dottie. "Connolly's?" he said. "Delayed indefinitely," she said. "Coffee?" "Please." He watched her pour it. "That's the 3rd supplier Beckett's touched this month. Harmon's Feed and Grain pulled out of 2 contracts last week with ranchers who'd been using them for 6 years. No explanation." "He's testing how fast I can adjust," Dottie said. "Yes." And when I adjust fast enough that it stops working? He moves to the next thing, Caleb said. Dottie set down the coffee pot. Caleb. She used his name the way she had the morning before, direct and without apology. And she watched something in his face shift, the way it always did when she did that. A small tightening, like a man who's been called back from somewhere far away. What's the next thing? He turned his cup in his hands. He has a lawyer coming in from Cheyenne, man named Aldous, specializes in property disputes. He paused. And foreclosures. I'm not behind on my mortgage. You will be, he said quietly, if your suppliers keep pulling out and your business drops enough that you can't make your quarterly payment. He looked at her directly. He's not trying to scare you off, Dottie. He's trying to make it mathematically impossible for you to stay. The kitchen door opened, and Eli leaned through. Mama, Mrs. Patterson's here about her usual Saturday order, and she says she also saw two men she doesn't recognize measuring the road outside. Tell her the order will be ready. And Eli? I know, he said. I didn't talk to the men. He disappeared. Dottie looked at Caleb. Measuring the road, she said. Getting ready to claim the easement is already in process, he said. It's a pressure tactic. If the town believes the railroad is definitely coming through here, people start assuming you're already done. They'll stop buying. Why invest in a business that's about to be bulldozed? So he's going to tell the whole town I'm finished before I've even started fighting? He's going to let them believe it, Caleb said. There's a difference. He won't say a word directly. He doesn't have to. Dottie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, There's something I need to ask you. He looked at her. The letter behind my hook, she said. The one I found yesterday morning. Every line of Caleb's body went still. It was the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting for a specific thing to happen and has still somehow not prepared himself for the moment it does. His hands stopped moving on the cup. His eyes stayed on hers. I put that there 8 months ago, he said. I've been putting one there every 8 months for 4 years. A pause. There are 5 of them. Dottie stared at him. 5. I kept telling myself the next one would be the last, that I'd stop. He looked down at the counter. I didn't stop. Caleb, she leaned forward, you wrote me a letter 4 years ago and put it behind my coat hook, and then rode past my window every night for 4 years and said nothing to me? Yes. Why? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, Because the last time I let myself care about someone, she died. His voice was flat, not hard, the flatness of a man who has said something so many times in his own head that the words have worn smooth. My wife. 4 years before I came to Redstone Crossing. She died in childbirth. The baby, too. He turned his cup once. I came here because it was a posting nobody wanted, and I didn't particularly want anything. And then I walked into your diner and watched you give that widow an extra biscuit and lie to her about it so she wouldn't feel like charity. He stopped. And? Dottie said. And I thought, there's a woman who understands that kindness is worth more when it costs you something. He finally looked up. I wasn't supposed to think anything. I came in for chowder. Dottie looked at him for a long moment. Outside, she could hear the town moving through its ordinary Friday afternoon. Wagons and voices, and the distant hammer from the new building going up on 2nd Street. All of it completely indifferent to the conversation happening in her diner. The other 4 letters, she said. Where are they? Same place. You put 5 letters behind my coat hook over 4 years, and I found exactly one of them, she said. You work fast in the mornings. I put the new one up and took the old one back each time. He paused. Except this time He stopped. You forgot to take it back. I was thinking about Beckett's man I saw outside your building Tuesday night. His jaw tightened. I was distracted. Dottie straightened. She reached into her apron pocket and set the letter on the counter between them, smoothed flat, the crease worn soft from how many times she'd folded and unfolded it in the past 18 hours. I want to read the other 4, she said. Caleb looked at the letter on the counter. Something moved through his face that wasn't quite pain and wasn't quite relief, and was maybe the particular expression of a man who has been holding a door shut with his whole body for 4 years, and is trying to decide whether to step aside. Dottie, I'm not asking you to say anything you're not ready to say, she said. I'm asking you to let me read what you already wrote. She held his gaze. There's a difference. The bell above the door rang before he could answer. Pearl came in with her coat buttoned wrong and her hair loose on one side, and the expression of someone who has been walking fast since they left wherever they came from. She looked at Caleb, then at Dottie, then at the letter on the counter, and she had enough sense to file all 3 observations away without commenting on any of them. He met with Aldous this afternoon, she said, sitting down 2 stools away from Caleb. The lawyer from Cheyenne.
I wasn't supposed to be in the hallway, but I was. She looked at her hands. Aldous told him the easement claim will hold up in territorial court as long as there's no counter-survey filed within 60 days. 60 days, Caleb said. Beckett told him not to worry about a counter-survey. He said... Pearl hesitated. He said the property would change hands before the 60 days were up. How? Dottie said. He didn't say how. Aldous didn't ask. Pearl looked up. But then Aldous left, and Beckett made another call. Man named Cruz. I've seen him around the hotel. He doesn't eat in the dining room, doesn't talk to the other guests. He just watches things. She lowered her voice. Beckett told him that the situation needed to be... He used the word simplified. He said a woman alone with a child and no family in the territory was a problem that simplified easily with the right pressure applied to the right point. The diner was very quiet. The right point, Dottie said. Pearl's eyes moved to the kitchen door and then back to Dottie. Dottie felt something cold move through her chest. Clean and sharp, not fear exactly, but the thing that lives just underneath fear that makes you either run or get very, very still. She got still. Eli, she said, without raising her voice. The kitchen door opened immediately, which meant he'd been listening, which she would address later. Yeah, Mama. You're sleeping at the Briggses tonight. Eli's face went flat, the way it did when he was about to argue. I don't need to sleep at Eli James Calloway, she said. Not loud. She didn't need loud. He read her face, his jaw set, 8 years old and already the spitting image of a man who knows when a decision is final. Yes, ma'am, he said. Pack what you need. I'll walk you over before dark. He went upstairs without another word. Dottie watched the ceiling for a moment, following the sound of his footsteps, and then she turned back to Pearl and Caleb. I need to know everything about this man Cruz, she said. Where he goes, who he talks to, what he's being paid to do. I can try to find out, Pearl said, but Dottie... She stopped herself on the name, uncertain. It's all right, Dottie said. If Beckett realizes I'm feeding you information, it won't just be me who's in trouble. He'll use it. He'll use anything. She pressed her lips together. He knows things about me. My father's debts. Where my sister lives in Colorado. He mentioned her once, very casually, the way you mention something to make sure the other person understands you could do something with it if you wanted to. Caleb set down his cup.
Pearl, look at me. She looked at him. Beckett's power is in making people believe they're alone, he said. That's the whole mechanism. You, Dottie, the women before. He finds the ones he thinks have nobody, and he uses that. The moment that stops being true, the mechanism breaks. He held her gaze.
You're not alone anymore. Do you understand that? Pearl stared at him for a moment. Then she nodded, quick and hard, like she was agreeing before she could talk herself out of it. Good, he said. He stood and put on his hat. I'm going to find out what Cruz has been hired to do. And I'm going to file a motion tomorrow morning to delay the easement claim on procedural grounds. It won't hold forever, but it'll buy time. He looked at Dottie. Don't open up alone tomorrow morning. I open alone every morning. Not tomorrow, he said. I'll be here at 4. Caleb, 4 o'clock, he said. I'll knock twice. He picked up his hat. He paused at the door in that way he had, that particular pause that she had spent 4 years pretending not to wait for. The other 4 letters, he said, without turning around. I'll bring them tomorrow. He walked out. Pearl watched the door swing shut. Then she turned to Dottie with an expression that was somewhere between sympathy and plain amazement. 4 years, she said. Don't, Dottie said. I know what you're just, Dottie said. She picked up the letter from the counter and put it back in her apron pocket. Go home. Lock your door. If anyone from the hotel asks where you were this afternoon, you were at the dry goods. Pearl stood. She buttoned her coat correctly this time, all the way to the top. At the door, she stopped. Mrs. Calloway? Dottie. Dottie. She said it carefully, like she was testing whether she was allowed to. What Beckett said, about pressure applied to the right point? She looked at her. He's not going to go after your building first. He's going to go after something you can't replace. Dottie met her eyes. I know, she said. After Pearl left, Dottie went upstairs and sat on the edge of Eli's bed and watched him pack his bag with the methodical thoroughness of a child who takes every task seriously. He folded his second shirt. He put in his book. He put in the small wooden horse Caleb had left on the counter one Thursday 8 months ago without explanation. Just set it down next to his coffee cup and pushed it to the side where Eli usually sat when he did his schoolwork. Eli had never asked where it came from. Dottie had never told him. Mama, Eli said, folding his extra socks, is the marshal going to help us? Yes, she said. Because he wants to, or because it's his job? Dottie looked at her son. Both, she said, and maybe something else. Eli considered this with that serious face. Tommy Briggs says the marshal used to be a federal detective before he came here. Says he took down a whole operation in Kansas before his wife died. He put the socks in the bag. Tommy says he came to Redstone Crossing because it was the smallest, quietest posting he could find. He looked up at her. But it's not quiet anymore. No, she said, it's not. Do you think he minds? Eli asked. That it stopped being quiet? Dottie thought about a letter written on a Thursday morning 4 years ago by a man who'd come in for chowder and stayed for reasons he'd been trying to explain to himself ever since. She thought about 1,460 nights of hoofbeats going slow past her window in the dark. No, she said, I don't think he minds. She walked Eli to the Briggses before dark, the way she'd promised. On the way back, passing the hotel, she saw the light in room 4 and the silhouette of a man standing at the window looking out. She didn't break stride. She walked back to her diner, bolted the back door the way Caleb had told her to, and sat down at her counter in the dark, with a cup of cold coffee, and the letter in her hand, and the knife mark in the wood in front of her, still clean,
and sharp and exact. She thought about what Pearl had said. Not your building. Something you can't replace. There was only one thing that fit that description. And tomorrow morning, at 4 o'clock, he was going to knock twice on her door. She pressed the letter flat on the counter and read it one more time in the dark. And when she finished, she did not fold it back up. She left it open, because some things have been folded too long already, and it was past time to let them breathe. He knocked twice at 4 o'clock exactly. Dottie had been awake for an hour already, which he probably knew because the lamp in her kitchen window had been lit since 3, and the smell of coffee had been working its way under the door since before that. She unbolted the back door, and Caleb stepped inside with cold air coming off his coat and 4 envelopes in his hand, and the particular expression of a man who has made a decision in the night and is committed to it, regardless of consequences. He set the envelopes on the counter. She set a cup of coffee beside them. They stood on opposite sides of the counter, and neither of them said anything for a moment, which was its own kind of conversation. "You don't have to read them now," he said. "I know," she said. She didn't touch the envelopes yet. "Did you find out about Cruz?" Caleb wrapped his hands around the cup. "He came into town 6 days ago, stayed 2 nights at the hotel, left, came back. He's not registered under his own name." He paused. "I've seen him before, 3 years ago, in a town called Millhaven. Man there was holding out on a land sale. Had an accident with his wagon on a stretch of road he'd driven 100 times. He looked at her. The road had been tampered with, couldn't be proved. Dottie absorbed this, and nobody connected it to Beckett. Beckett wasn't in Millhaven. He's never directly connected to anything. Caleb's jaw tightened. That's how he operates. He stays clean. Cruz does the work, and Beckett expresses sincere condolences. "So what do we do about Cruz?" "I've been watching him. He hasn't moved on anything yet. He's still in the observation phase." He looked at her. "Which means we have a small window where we can move first." "Move how?" "I filed the procedural motion this morning. That buys 60 days on the easement claim." He set down his cup. "But Dottie, the motion is public record. Beckett will know by noon that I filed it." She understood immediately. "And he'll know you're involved?" "Yes." "Which means he'll move faster?" "Yes." She looked at the 4 envelopes on the counter. Then she picked up the one marked with the earliest date, October 1879, 1 year after the first letter she'd found. She broke the seal and read it standing up, the way she read everything, because sitting down for bad news or good news both seemed like a concession she'd never been willing to make. The letter was shorter than the first. It said, "I came back today to take the last letter back, the way I always do. And instead, I stood outside your door for 11 minutes. I counted. I know I counted because I was trying to decide whether 11 minutes was long enough to constitute a decision. I decided it wasn't. I put the new letter up and took the old one home, and told myself next time would be different. I have been telling myself that for a year. I'm starting to suspect I'm a liar." Dottie set it down. "A liar," she said. "That particular quality hasn't improved much," he said. She looked at him across the counter. "Caleb, why are you really here at 4 in the morning with 4 letters and a filed motion?" He was quiet for a beat. "Because Cruz was outside your building last night," he said. 30 yards down, in the gap between the hardware store and the old stable. He was there for 2 hours. His voice was very even. "And I stood on the other side of the road for 2 hours watching him watch your window. And by the time he left, I had a fairly clear understanding of what I am and am not willing to let happen." The kitchen was very still. "What are you not willing to let happen?" she said. He met her eyes. "You," he said simply. "I'm not willing to let anything happen to you." Before she could answer, the back door rattled. Not a knock, a rattle. The specific sound of someone testing whether a bolt was thrown. Dottie's hand went to the counter. Caleb was already moving, smooth and fast, around the end of the counter and to the back wall beside the door. He put his finger to his lips.
She nodded. They waited. The rattle came again, harder this time. Then footsteps on the porch, going around the side of the building. Caleb looked at her. "Stay here," he said quietly. "Don't tell me to." 30 seconds, he said. "Give me 30 seconds. He went out the back. She counted. At 28, she heard a crash, then a grunt, then Caleb's voice, low and level, saying something she couldn't make out through the wall. At 45 seconds, the back door opened, and Caleb came back in with his hand closed around the upper arm of a man she didn't recognize. Thin and pale, with a cut above his eyebrow that was bleeding freely down the side of his face. Not Cruz. Younger than Cruz. Younger than Dottie had expected. "Sit," Caleb said. And the man sat, because when Caleb used that particular tone, sitting was the only reasonable option. Dottie looked at the man. He was maybe 22, with the eyes of someone who had made a series of small bad decisions that had accumulated into one large, terrible one. He was looking at Caleb with the expression of a person revising their life choices in real time. "What's your name?" Dottie said. He looked at her, then at Caleb, then back at her. "Danny," he said. "Danny Foss." "What were you hired to do, Danny Foss?" He pressed his lips together. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Dottie said, "and then the marshal is going to ask you, and I promise you his version of asking is considerably less comfortable than mine." She leaned forward. "What were you hired to do?" Danny Foss looked at the bleeding above his eye, and then at his hands, and then he said very quietly, "Check the lock. Just check the lock and report back." "Report what?" "Whether you bolt the back at night." He swallowed. "Cruz wanted to know your routine. When you lock up, when you're awake, whether anyone stays here overnight." He looked up. "I swear that's all. I'm just supposed to watch and report. I haven't done anything." "Yet," Caleb said. I don't do the other kind of work. I needed money, and Cruz said it was just watching. I didn't know what it was for." "Where is Cruz now?" Caleb said. "Hotel. Room 2, ground floor." Danny looked miserable. "He's meeting with someone tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Someone coming in on the eastern stage." "Who?" "I don't know. Cruz just said it was the man Beckett called in to finalize things." Dottie and Caleb exchanged a look. "Finalize what things?" Dottie said. "I don't know." And from the look on his face, that was true. He was scared enough that lying would have taken more composure than he had left. Caleb straightened. "You're going to go back to whatever room you're sleeping in," he said. "You're going to tell Cruz the back lock was thrown and the place was dark. And tomorrow morning you're going to find somewhere to be that is not this town. Do you understand me?" Danny nodded rapidly. "Because if I see you in Redstone Crossing after noon tomorrow," Caleb said, "I'm going to arrest you for attempted breaking and entering. And that conversation about what you were hired to do is going to happen in front of a territorial judge instead of in this kitchen." He stepped back. "Go." Danny Foss went. The back door swung shut behind him. Dottie stood for a moment in the middle of her kitchen. Then she picked up her coffee, found it cold, and put it back down. "Someone coming in on the eastern stage," she said. "Lawyer, most likely," Caleb said. "Or a second enforcer, if Beckett's decided to accelerate." He looked at her. We need Pearl in that hotel lobby tomorrow morning, before 8 o'clock. I'll get word to her tonight. And Dottie, he stopped. What? I need you to hear me on something and not argue with me until I finish. She crossed her arms. That's a considerable ask. I know. He came back to the counter and stood across from her, and there was something in the way he planted himself, level and deliberate, that reminded her of the way her husband used to stand when he had something hard to say and intended to say it properly. Beckett knows I filed that motion. By tonight, he'll know I was the one who took Danny Foss off your porch. He's going to understand that you're not alone in this, and that changes his calculus. He paused. The part I need you to hear is that it may also make him move on Eli. The word landed the way he'd meant it to, clean and without softening, because he understood her well enough to know she didn't want softening. Explain, she said. If he can't get to you directly, and he can't get to your property legally, he looks for leverage. You have one leverage point. His eyes were steady on hers. Eli needs to stay at the Briggs place, not for one night, but until this is finished. And he needs to not know why, because an 8-year-old who knows someone might be coming for him is an 8-year-old who might do something brave and stupid. Dottie thought about her son packing his bag with his careful hands, folding his second shirt, putting in the small wooden horse. He already suspects, she said. Suspecting and knowing are different, Caleb said. Let him suspect. Don't confirm it. She nodded once. And you, he said. I need you to not open this diner alone for the next week. Not at 3 in the morning, not any other time. I'll be here before you open, or I'll send someone I trust. I can take care of myself. I know you can, he said, without hesitation, without condescension, in a tone that made clear he meant it entirely. This isn't about whether you can. This is about not giving Cruz a window. He held her gaze. Dottie, I have spent 4 years riding past this building every night because it was the only thing I could do that felt like enough. It was not enough. I understand that now. I'm asking you to let me do something that is actually enough. She looked at him for a long time. 4 years, she said. Yes. Every night. Every night. And you never once thought to just... She stopped, shook her head. Knock, he said. Yes, frequently. The corner of his mouth moved. I was working on it. You were working on it for 4 years. I'm a thorough man. She looked at him, and something shifted in her chest, the way ice shifts in a river in the first week of spring, not breaking yet, but beginning to remember that it can. She picked up the remaining 3 envelopes from the counter and held them against her chest. I'll read these tonight, she said. He nodded. And tomorrow at 4, she said. When you knock twice, I want you to come in and have coffee and tell me what you should have told me 2 years ago, instead of putting it in an envelope behind my coat hook. Caleb looked at her steadily. All right, he said. All right, she said. Now go find out who's on that eastern stage. He went. She stood in her kitchen and listened to his boots on the porch and then the quiet that came after, which was a different quality of quiet than the one she'd lived in for 4 years. And she noticed the difference the way you notice when a sound you've gotten used to finally stops. Pearl arrived at 7:30 that morning, with her coat on correctly, and the expression of someone who had made a decision in the night that she intended to stand behind. I heard about the boy at your back door, she said, sitting down at the counter. Dottie looked at her. Word travels. Danny Foss has a loose mouth. Half the hotel heard him tell Cruz the lock was thrown. Pearl's jaw was set. Cruz didn't believe him. He told Beckett this morning that he thought someone had been warned. She paused.
Beckett said to proceed regardless. Proceed with what? He didn't say, but he told Cruz the timeline had changed, that things needed to be done before the weekend. She looked at Dottie directly. There's a man coming in on the eastern stage. Beckett called him a cleaner. The word sat between them. A cleaner, Dottie said. I've heard that word used once before, Pearl said quietly. In Clearwater, before my mother's friend lost her shop. She looked at her hands. It means someone who makes sure there's nothing left to dispute. No property, no records, no person standing in the way. She looked up. It doesn't just mean the building, Dottie. The diner was very quiet. I need you in that hotel lobby at 8 o'clock, Dottie said. I need you to see this man's face. Get a name if you can, but a face at minimum. I'll be there. Pearl stood, then stopped. Dottie, there's one more thing. She reached into her coat and produced a folded paper. I found this in Beckett's wastepaper basket last night when I was clearing the sitting room. He'd torn it part way, but not all the way through. Dottie took it and unfolded it carefully. It was a deed of sale. Her property, pre-filled. Beckett's name in the buyer's line, her name in the seller's line, and a signature line at the bottom that was blank. Except it wasn't entirely blank. Someone had practiced her signature. 3 attempts, right there on the deed itself, each one slightly more accurate than the last. Dottie looked at it for a very long time. He was going to forge it, she said. Or force it, Pearl said. Both are possible. Dottie set the deed on the counter. She smoothed it flat with her palm, slowly, the way she smoothed dough, with the kind of deliberate pressure that means you were deciding something. Pearl, she said, can you get me into Beckett's room? Pearl stared at her. What? His room, room 4. I need 10 minutes in there, without him in it. Dottie, if he comes back and finds you, then I need to make sure he doesn't come back for 10 minutes. She looked at Pearl. Can you do that? Pearl was quiet for a moment. He takes a walk every morning at 8:30, she said slowly. 20 minutes, always the same direction, down to the river road and back. The maid does his room at 9, but she starts at the far end of the hall. She pressed her lips together. You'd have maybe 15 minutes between his walk and the maid. That's enough. Dottie, what are you looking for? Dottie picked up the forged deed and held it in front of Pearl. He's been planning this for longer than 2 weeks, she said. A man who practices a woman's signature and keeps a pre-filled deed in his room didn't come up with this in a fortnight. He has records, correspondence, a paper trail going back months, maybe longer. She looked at her. If I can find that trail, I don't have to wait for him to make his move. I can take it to a territorial judge and end this before anyone gets hurt. Pearl looked at the deed, then at Dottie. And if the marshal knew you were planning this? She said. The marshal, Dottie said, would tell me it was too dangerous and offer to do it himself, which I appreciate, and which I'm not going to let happen. She folded the deed and put it in her apron pocket, alongside the 3 unread letters. He's already put himself between me and enough. This one's mine to carry. Pearl looked at her with an expression that was somewhere between admiration and genuine concern. The particular expression of someone who has just recognized a quality in another person that they deeply respect and are not entirely sure will end well for either of them. 8:30, Pearl said finally. I'll make sure he leaves on schedule. After Pearl left, the morning rush came in, and Dottie worked through it with the same efficient calm she brought to every service, setting down plates and pouring coffee and breaking up a minor argument between 2 miners about whose stool was whose. She did it all with the forged deed in her apron pocket and 3 unopened letters pressed against it, and the particular clarity of mind that comes when you have made a decision and stopped second-guessing it. At 8 o'clock, she looked up and through the window saw the eastern stage rolling down the main road, trailing dust. A man stepped off. Dark coat, no hat. He shook hands with someone Dottie couldn't see from her angle. She looked at the clock. 8:25. She untied her apron, folded it over the counter, and called to the back room. "Mrs. Rourke, can you cover the counter for half an hour?" The older woman who helped her on busy mornings came out drying her hands. "Everything all right?" "Fine," Dottie said. "I've got an errand." She put on her coat. She put her hand in her pocket and felt the letters and the deed and the small, solid fact of what she was about to do. Then she walked out into the October morning and turned toward the hotel, moving at the pace of a woman with somewhere specific to be, which was the pace of a woman who had stopped waiting for the world to arrange itself into something survivable and had decided to arrange it herself. The hotel smelled like coal smoke and boot leather and the particular kind of quiet that buildings hold when they're pretending nothing is happening inside them. Pearl was at the front desk when Dottie came through the door, talking to the clerk about a laundry order with the focused attention of a woman who was absolutely not watching the hallway behind her. She didn't look at Dottie. She didn't need to. She shifted her weight slightly to the left, which pointed her right shoulder at the corridor leading to the guest rooms, which was the only signal Dottie needed. Beckett was gone. Dottie walked down the corridor at a pace that was not hurrying and not dawdling, the pace of a person with a legitimate reason to be exactly where they were. Room 4 was the third door on the right. The key was in the lock on the outside, which meant the maid hadn't reached it yet. Dottie turned the key, opened the door, stepped inside, and pulled it shut behind her. She stood still for 3 seconds and let her eyes adjust and her breathing settle. Then she went to work. The desk first. Beckett was a neat man, which was its own kind of information. His papers were in 2 stacks, squared at the corners, nothing loose. She went through the left stack first, lifting each paper by its top edge, reading fast, replacing it at exactly the same angle. Correspondence from Denver. Supply contracts for the competing lunch counter. A letter from the Union Pacific Survey Office confirming route coordinates. She read that last one twice. The railroad easement coordinates were listed in precise figures, and Dottie was not a surveyor. But she had lived on that land for 6 years, and she knew its measurements the way she knew the measurements of her own kitchen. The coordinates on this letter did not place the easement through her foundation. They placed it 40 yards north, on the far side of the road. Beckett had lied to Pearl. He'd lied to Aldous. The easement claim was fabricated entirely. She folded the letter and put it in her coat. The right stack next. More correspondence. A ledger she didn't have time to read in full. A telegram from someone identified only as R.W. that read, "Confirmation received. Property must be cleared before first snowfall or contract lapses. Do what is necessary." She put that one in her coat, too. She was moving to the wardrobe when she heard voices in the corridor. She stopped breathing. 2 men. One was Beckett. She recognized the smooth, unhurried cadence of his speech, the way he formed sentences like a man who'd practiced them. The other voice she didn't know. They stopped outside the door. "The motion Harding filed is a procedural nuisance," Beckett was saying. "Nothing more. Aldous will have it dismissed inside a week." And the woman? The second voice was flat, uninflected, the voice of a man for whom questions were simply requests for logistical information. "Becomes irrelevant once the property transfers," Beckett said, "which it will, one way or another. The marshal complicates things." "The marshal," Beckett said, "has personal reasons for his involvement that have nothing to do with the law. Personal reasons are exploitable." A pause. "He cares about her," more than she knows, and more than is professional. That kind of attachment makes a man predictable. You want me to use it? I want you to be aware of it, Beckett said, as a contingency. Their footsteps moved past the door and down the corridor. Dottie stood in the middle of Beckett's room, with 2 stolen documents in her coat, and her heart hitting the inside of her ribs with the focused persistence of a man trying to break down a door. She waited 60 seconds. Then she went to the door, eased it open, checked the corridor, and walked out with the same unremarkable pace she'd come in with. Pearl was still at the front desk.
As Dottie passed, Pearl said to the clerk, loudly enough, "And tell him the gray shirts need extra starch this time," which was meaningless except as confirmation that the lobby was clear and Dottie should keep walking. She walked out of the hotel and kept walking until she reached the alley behind the telegraph office, where she stopped and stood with her back against the wall and let herself breathe for a full minute. Personal reasons are exploitable. She thought about that. Then she straightened her coat and walked to the jail. Sheriff Gus Wade was 61 years old and looked like a man who had been mildly inconvenienced by life for so long that inconvenience had simply become his resting expression. He was behind his desk eating a biscuit when Dottie came in, and he looked at her face and he set the biscuit down. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. "I need 5 minutes," she said. "You look like you need 20. He gestured at the chair across the desk. "Sit." She sat. She put both stolen documents on his desk and explained where she'd gotten them without embellishment and without apology. Gus read both papers with the slow thoroughness of a man who has learned that reading things fast leads to missing things that matter. When he finished, he set them side by side and looked at them for a moment. "The easement coordinates don't match his claim," he said. "No." "And this telegram is directing him to clear the property by first snowfall or lose a railroad contract." "Yes." Gus leaned back in his chair, which protested under his weight with the sound of long suffering. "Mrs. Calloway, you understand that you obtained these from a private room." "I do." "Which creates a difficulty in terms of presenting them as evidence." "I understand that," she said, "which is why I'm here. Because I need you to tell me how to make them legitimate." Gus looked at her. There are 2 ways to make illegally obtained documents legitimate in a territorial proceeding. First way, you convince the person who holds the originals to produce them voluntarily. He paused. Second way, you find the same information from a source that doesn't require breaking into someone's hotel room. "The telegram came from someone called R.W., she said. "The Union Pacific Survey Office produced the easement coordinates letter." Gus went still. "The Survey Office?" "Yes, which means there's an official copy of those coordinates on file somewhere that shows the easement doesn't go through my property." "It does indeed," Gus said slowly. "And I can subpoena that record without requiring any explanation for why I want it." He looked at her with something that might have been respect, if Gus Wade's face were capable of expressing something that direct. "That's sharp thinking, Mrs. Calloway." "And the telegram?" "Who is R.W.?" "I don't know yet." "Find out," he said. "If R.W. is a Union Pacific officer, that telegram is evidence of railroad fraud, which is a federal matter. That takes this out of territorial court entirely and puts it somewhere Beckett's money has considerably less reach." He picked up the copied telegram. "Where's Harding?" "I don't know. He filed the procedural motion this morning." "I'll find him." Gus stood, which was a production involving considerable effort and the assistance of his desk. "Mrs. Calloway, the cleaner Beckett brought in. His name might be Cruz." "I know who Cruz is." His voice was flat. "I've been trying to connect him to 3 incidents across 2 territories for 2 years. If he's here on Beckett's payroll,
That's the first time I've had him in a specific place at a specific time with a documented connection to a specific crime. He looked at her directly. I need you to stay visible today. Keep your regular hours. Act as though nothing has changed. Act as though a man isn't planning to make me disappear before the weekend. Yes, he said, without any indication that he found this an unreasonable request. Can you do that? I've been doing it for a week, she said. I'm getting good at it. She was back behind her counter by 9:30, which was when the second morning wave of customers came in. The merchants and the wives and the school teacher who came every day for coffee and never ordered anything else and always left exactly 15 cents. Dottie worked through the service with steady hands and a level face, and the two documents no longer in her coat because she'd left them with Gus Wade, which meant the only things in her pockets now were 3 letters she still hadn't read. She read them during the half hour between morning service and lunch preparation, standing at her counter with the kitchen empty and the front door locked. The second letter, October 1880, said, I watched you turn away 3 customers today who couldn't pay. You did it the same way both times. You told them you were out of what they wanted, and then you sent Eli around the back with the food anyway, so they wouldn't have to ask. I think you believe nobody notices this. I want you to know that somebody does. I want you to know that it matters. I don't have a better way to say that than just saying it plainly. The third letter, October 1881, said, I almost came in today for reasons other than chowder. I had a whole speech prepared. I rehearsed it on the ride in, which I recognize is not something a man with any dignity admits to. But then I saw your face when you thought nobody was looking. You were watching the mountains through the window, and you had that expression you get, like you're asking them something, and you're not sure they're going to answer. And I couldn't deliver a rehearsed speech to a woman making that face. It would have been a desecration. So I had the chowder, and I left, and I came home, and I wrote this instead. One day I will find better courage. I am genuinely uncertain when. The fourth letter, October 1882, written 2 weeks ago, said, Beckett came to town today. I know why. I know what he wants, and I know what he'll do if she refuses. And I know what I have to do about it. And for the first time in 4 years, I am not afraid of what comes next. I am only afraid of what I should have said 1,000 Thursdays ago and didn't. If I get through what's coming, I'm going to say it. I'm putting that in writing so I have to answer to it later. If something happens to me before I get the chance, if you're reading this after and I didn't make it, I want you to know that 4 years of Thursday chowder with you was the best thing that happened to me after a long time of nothing good happening at all. That's the whole truth. That's all of it. Dottie folded that last letter very carefully and held it in her hand for a moment. Outside, she heard the town going about its noon business, indifferent and ordinary. She heard the stage road, the blacksmith, a dog somewhere, picking a fight with something that didn't want to fight. She heard boots on her porch. Not Caleb's boots. She knew his by now, the particular weight and rhythm of them. These were different, heavier, deliberate in a different way. She put the letter in her pocket and picked up the butcher knife and held it loosely at her side, below the counter line, and said, "We're closed for the next hour." The door opened anyway. The man who walked in was not Beckett, and not Cruz, and not anyone she recognized. He was built like someone who had spent 20 years doing work that required it, wide through the shoulders, moving with the easy, unhurried confidence of a man who knew exactly how dangerous he was. He wore a dark coat, no hat. He looked at Dottie, and he looked at the kitchen door, and he looked at the room generally, with the brief, efficient survey of a man cataloging exits. Mrs. Calloway, he said, not a question.
That's right, she said, and we're closed.
I only need a minute.
He came to the counter, not fast, not slow, and sat down on the stool nearest to her, which was deliberate because it was also the stool nearest to the back hallway.
My name is Rennick. I work for Mr. Beckett.
I know who you work for, she said. He looked at her with something that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite respect, but was in the neighborhood of both.
Mr. Beckett wanted me to give you a final opportunity to consider his offer. He has authorized me to increase it. $1,200, cash payment, 30 days to vacate.
The answer is the same as the last time he asked, Dottie said, and the time before that.
Mrs. Calloway.
He put both hands flat on the counter and leaned forward slightly, and his voice dropped into a register that was not quite threatening and was not quite anything else. I've seen Mr. Beckett's patience run out before. The outcomes are not good. He paused. You have a son. The kitchen was completely silent. Dottie looked at Rennick across the counter. She looked at his hands, flat on the wood of the counter her husband had built from boards hauled 40 miles in a borrowed wagon. She looked at his face, and the way he held it in the practiced blankness of a man delivering a message that he knew was a threat, and was confident she knew it too. She moved the butcher knife onto the counter slowly, with deliberate care, and set it down so that it was pointing at no one in particular, and visible to everyone in the room. My son, she said quietly, is none of your business, and none of Beckett's business, and none of this conversation's business. And if his name comes out of your mouth again, you're going to leave this diner in considerably worse condition than you came in. She held his eyes. Are we clear?
Rennick looked at the knife. He looked at her face.
$1,200 is a generous offer, he said. Get off my stool, she said. He stood. He adjusted his coat. He walked to the door with the same unhurried pace he'd walked in with, and at the door he paused. Before the weekend, he said, without turning around, and walked out. Dottie stood alone in her diner, with her hand on the handle of the butcher knife, and the sound of her own breathing very loud in the quiet. She was still standing there when the back door opened, and Caleb came through so fast she took a step back before she recognized him. I saw him come in, Caleb said. He looked at her, a quick, complete assessment, and some of the tension went out of his shoulders. Are you all right? Fine. She let go of the knife. He said before the weekend. I know. Caleb came to the counter. Gus Wade found me 20 minutes ago. He subpoenaed the survey records. The real easement coordinates are already on their way from the territorial office by telegram. He paused. And he identified R.W. She looked at him. Randolph Whitmore, he said. Assistant Superintendent, Union Pacific Eastern Division. He's been running a side arrangement with Beckett for 2 years, steering railroad contracts toward properties Beckett acquires cheaply. That's how the scheme works. Beckett buys the land at a fraction of its value. Whitmore certifies the railroad routing through it. Beckett sells to the railroad at an enormous profit. He looked at her. You're the 4th property he's tried to acquire this way. The first 3 owners sold. You were supposed to be straightforward. I have a habit of being inconvenient, she said. Yes. The corner of his mouth moved. Then it stopped. Dottie, Gus sent a federal telegraph this morning about Whitmore. The moment that goes through, Beckett will know his arrangement is blown. He met her eyes. He has until the weekend, and he knows it. Rennick coming here wasn't a final offer. It was Beckett finding out whether you're going to make the next part difficult. And am I? I believe he has his answer, Caleb said, looking at the knife on the counter. She almost smiled. Almost. What does he do when the legal approach fails? Caleb was quiet for a beat. He cleans the board, he said. Gets rid of every loose end before he runs. Meaning? Meaning Cruz, he said. Meaning tonight, most likely. He's not going to leave loose ends in a town where a federal investigation is about to start. He looked at her. I need you out of this building tonight, Dottie. You and this... He stopped himself. Started again. I need you somewhere Cruz can't find you. This is my building. I know. My husband built that counter. I know that too. Caleb, I know, he said. I'm not asking you to give it up. I'm asking you to be alive tomorrow to come back to it. He put both hands on the counter between them, leaning forward, and his voice was very quiet and very even in the way it got when he meant something completely. I wrote you a letter 4 years ago that I couldn't hand you. I wrote you 4 more after that. I have been riding past this window every night for 4 years because it was the closest I could get to telling you what I couldn't say out loud. I am done with things I can't say out loud. He held her gaze. Please, let me get you somewhere safe tonight. Dottie looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the 4th letter. If I get through what's coming, I'm going to say it. I'm putting that in writing so I have to answer to it later. Where? She said. Briggs' house, he said. You and Eli under one roof, and 2 of Gus's deputies outside. Cruz won't move on a house with visible protection. He works in the dark and the quiet. And you? I'm going to be here, he said. She stared at him. You're going to stay in my diner and wait for Cruz? Yes. That's efficient, he said. I was going to say dangerous. Also that. He didn't look away. But if Cruz comes here tonight and finds the place empty, he burns it and disappears before dawn and we lose him. If he comes here and finds me, we have him. And with Cruz in custody, Beckett has no play left. He runs or he surrenders, and either way, it's over. He paused. Gus will have deputies at both ends of the road. I won't be alone. Dottie looked at the counter. At the knife mark she'd put in it 2 days ago. At the grain of the wood her husband's hands had planed smooth 6 years ago, in a building he'd said was going to be something, and had been right about in every way that counted. If something happens to you, she said, it won't. Caleb, if something happens to you, I need to know that what's in those letters... She stopped. Her jaw tightened. I need to know that it was true. All of it. Not just something you wrote because you were lonely. He looked at her for a moment, with those eyes that were usually a closed door, and were right now, very deliberately, not. Dorothy Calloway, he said quietly. I have been eating the same bowl of chowder every Thursday for 4 years because the alternative was not seeing you, and that stopped being acceptable to me somewhere around October of 1879. He held her gaze. That is not loneliness. That is the most decided I have ever been about anything. The kitchen was very still. All right, she said. All right, you'll go to the Briggs house? All right, it was true, she said. And yes, I'll go to the Briggs house. She picked up the knife and set it back on the proper hook with the same deliberate care she gave to everything. But Caleb, when this is over, when Cruz is in a cell and Beckett is finished and my building is still standing, you are going to come in through that front door on a Thursday morning and sit at that counter and say to my face what you've been putting in envelopes for 4 years. He looked at her. No more letters, she said. No more riding past in the dark. You come through the door. Yes, he said. I will. She picked up her coat. At the kitchen door she stopped and looked back at him standing at her counter, in her kitchen,
in the building her husband had built, and she had kept standing through 4 years of hard winters and harder mornings. And she thought that this was what it looked like when something that had been impossible for a long time quietly decided to become possible. "The chowder's on the stove," she said. "Help yourself." She walked out into the afternoon. Behind her, she heard him pick up the ladle.
The Briggs house was warm and loud, in the particular way of a home that had too many children in it, and had made peace with that fact. Mrs. Briggs put Dottie in the back room with a quilt and a cup of chamomile tea, and the firm instruction that worrying was permitted, but pacing was not, because the floors had just been swept. Dottie sat on the edge of the bed and did not pace and did not sleep, and worried with the focused efficiency of a woman who had been doing it professionally for 6 years. Eli came in at 9 o'clock and sat beside her without being asked. "Is he still at the diner?" he said. "Yes." "Is he going to be all right?" Dottie looked at her son. His face was serious, the way it always was. That particular gravity that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the fact that he had been paying close attention to the world since he was old enough to look at it. She had spent 4 years trying to protect him from the harder parts of that world. She thought now that she had perhaps underestimated what he had already understood on his own. "Yes," she said. "You don't know that for certain." "No," she said, "but I believe it. And sometimes that's the same thing." Eli thought about this seriously. "Tommy Briggs says the marshal's the best shot in the territory." "Tommy Briggs says a lot of things." "He's usually right, though." Eli pulled his knees up. "Mama, when this is over, is he going to keep coming for chowder on Thursdays?" Dottie looked at her hands. "I think," she said carefully, "that he may start coming on other days, too." Eli nodded, in the way he nodded when something he had already figured out was finally confirmed to him. He did not say anything else about it, which was its own kind of grace. He lay down on the other side of the bed and was asleep in 4 minutes, with the absolute confidence of a child who has decided that the adults have matters in hand, and rest is therefore reasonable. Dottie sat beside him and listened to the dark house breathe, and waited. The shot came at 11:30. 1 shot, then silence, then 2 more in quick succession. She was on her feet before the echo finished. Mrs. Briggs appeared in the doorway with a lamp, her face pale. "Stay with Eli," Dottie said, and was out the front door before Mrs. Briggs could answer. She ran the 3 blocks to her diner in the cold dark, with her coat half buttoned and her heart making very poor use of the space available to it. The road was lit from ahead, and for 1 terrible second she thought the diner was on fire. And then she got close enough to see that the light was from lamps in the windows, and from the torches 2 of Gus's deputies were holding in the road outside. Gus himself was on her porch. She ran up the steps, and he put a hand out, and she stopped. "He's all right," Gus said immediately. "He's all right, Mrs. Calloway." She pushed past him anyway. Caleb was sitting at her counter. He had his left hand pressed against his right side, and Pearl, who should not have been there but was standing beside him, pressing a folded cloth against the same location with more force than looked comfortable. There was blood on Caleb's shirt. There was also blood on the floor, and a trail of it leading toward the back door, which was standing open, and from outside, Dottie could hear a man making noises that indicated he was alive and in pain, and would remain in the first condition for the foreseeable future. "Cruz?" she said. "In custody," Caleb said. "He's been shot in the leg. He'll keep." She came to the counter and stood in front of him, and looked at his face, and then at Pearl's hands, and then at his face again. "How bad?" "Cracked rib at worst," he said. "It didn't go in. It grazed." "That's not what grazed looks like." "It's what this graze looks like." He held her eyes steadily.
I'm all right, Dottie. She put her hand over Pearl's without thinking, and Pearl stepped back and let her take over the pressure. His hand came up and covered hers, not moving it, just covering it, the way you cover something you want to keep in place. Tell me what happened, she said. He came in through the back window at 10:45, Caleb said, which I was expecting. The window latch has been loose since August. I noticed it the first time I was in your kitchen. He paused. I was behind the counter. He had a knife, and I had a better position. But he was faster than I expected. He got inside my range before I could stop it. Hence the cracked rib. Hence that, he agreed. I put him down with the second shot. He was trying to reach the stove. He looked at her. He wasn't here for the building, Dottie. He brought lamp oil in his coat. He was going to burn it from the inside and make sure I didn't come out. The cloth under her hand was warm. She pressed harder.
You said you'd be all right, she said.
I am all right.
Caleb.
I know. His hand tightened over hers. I know. I'm sorry. Gus came through the door behind her. Dr. Aldridge is on his way. Should be 5 minutes. He looked at Caleb. Cruz is talking. We haven't even asked him anything yet, and he's already talking, which tells me he knows exactly how much trouble he's in and has decided that cooperation is his best remaining option. Beckett, Caleb said. Deputies are at the hotel now. Gus's voice was flat and satisfied in the way of a man who has been waiting 2 years for a particular thing to fall into place and is watching it fall. Rennick, too. And I've had 2 telegrams back from the federal office in the past hour. Randolph Whitmore was taken into custody this evening in Cheyenne. The railroad fraud charge is confirmed. Once that's on the record, every property transaction Beckett made under that arrangement gets reviewed. He paused. He's not just finished in Redstone Crossing. He's finished. Dottie stood at her counter with her hand pressed against Caleb's side, and heard that, and felt the thing that had been sitting on her chest for 2 weeks. The cold weight of it, the constant low-level arithmetic of threat and counter-threat, lift with a completeness that surprised her. She had expected relief. She had not expected it to feel this much like breathing for the first time. Pearl touched her arm. Sit down, she said quietly. Let him sit down too. The doctor's coming. They sat. Pearl made coffee with the ease of someone who had spent enough time in someone else's kitchen to know where everything was kept, which made Dottie look at her for a moment, with a feeling she recognized after a second as the beginning of genuine affection. Why are you here? Dottie said. I told you to go home. You told me to lock my door, Pearl said, setting down cups. I locked it. And then I unlocked it and came here, because I was not going to sit in my room while Cruz was in your building. She poured coffee without looking up. I was outside with one of Gus's deputies. I've been here since 10 o'clock. Caleb looked at Pearl and then at Dottie with an expression that said clearly that he found this both unsurprising and correct. Dr. Aldridge arrived at midnight, examined Caleb with the brisk efficiency of a man who had been woken up in the middle of the night enough times to have developed opinions about it, determined that 2 ribs were cracked and not broken, bound them with practiced speed, and told Caleb that he was not to lift anything heavier than a coffee cup for the next 3 weeks, and that this advice would be ignored, and he was stating it for the record regardless. Caleb agreed to the terms with the expression of a man who intended to honor exactly one of them. After the doctor left, Gus came back in and sat down across the counter and put a folded paper in front of Dottie. Beckett's in a cell, he said. He asked for his lawyer. I told him his lawyer was also in a cell, in Cheyenne. He nodded at the paper. That's a territorial court order confirming the actual easement coordinates. Your property is not in the railroad path. Never was. He looked at her. Your building stands, Mrs. Calloway. Everything he told you was a fabrication. She looked at the paper. She thought about Harrison Beckett in his clean boots practicing her signature on a pre-filled deed. 3 attempts, each one slightly better than the last. "What happens to him?" she said. "Federal fraud charge to start. The railroad scheme alone is 10 years minimum." Gus picked up his coffee. "Add the extortion, the attempted arson, directing crews. He will not be inconveniencing anyone in this territory for a considerable length of time."
Pearl let out a breath that she had apparently been holding since October. "My father's debt," she said. Gus looked at her. "Was it a legitimate debt, or something Beckett manufactured to hold you?" Pearl was quiet for a moment. "He bought it from the man my father originally owed, paid it off, and then told me I owed it to him instead." "That's a form of coercion under territorial law," Gus said flatly. "When Beckett's assets are seized for restitution, that debt gets dissolved, along with everything else he held." He stood up, joints complaining. "Go home, Miss McAllister, both of you. It's midnight, and I have paperwork that's going to ruin the rest of my week." He left. The diner was quiet. Pearl put on her coat. At the door, she stopped and looked at both of them for a moment, with the expression of someone who is witnessing something they are going to want to remember clearly. "Thursday," she said to Caleb. "She opens at 5. She walked out. Caleb looked at the door, then at Dottie. "I like her," he said. "So do I," Dottie said. "She's going to work here. I've already decided." "Have you told her that?" "Not yet. She'll find out Thursday." She looked at him. "How's the rib?" "Manageable." "That means it hurts." "Yes," he said. "That's what manageable means." She looked at him sitting at her counter, in her kitchen, at 11 minutes past midnight, with blood on his shirt and 2 cracked ribs, and the particular calm of a man who has done the thing he came to do and considers the ledger settled. She thought about 4 letters in her coat pocket. She thought about 1,460 nights of hoofbeats going past in the dark. "You were going to say something," she said. "Before this is over," you said. "When this is over, you were going to come through the front door and say it." "I remember," he said. "It's over," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he stood from the stool, carefully, with the careful movement of a man working around 2 cracked ribs. And he came around the end of the counter and stood in front of her, and the distance between them was 3 feet, and then 2, and then none. "Dorothy Calloway," he said, quietly enough that it was only for the kitchen and not for anywhere else. "I rode past your window for 4 years because I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped. I wrote you letters I couldn't hand you because I was afraid of what you'd do with the truth." He stopped. His eyes were steady and open in the way that cost him something. "I am done being afraid of you knowing how I feel. I am in love with you. I have been in love with you since the morning I watched you give that widow a full loaf and pretend it was day-old bread so she wouldn't have to feel it. I should have told you 2 years ago. I should have told you the first Thursday after I wrote that first letter. I am telling you now, and I am not going to put it in an envelope and leave it behind a coat hook. And I am not going to ride past your window tonight and pretend it's enough. Because it isn't. And I think you know that. And I think I've known it for considerably longer than I've been willing to admit." He stopped talking and waited. Dottie looked at him. She thought about the morning 4 years ago when a man with closed-door eyes had sat at the end of her counter and ordered chowder without looking at her. And she had told herself she noticed nothing about him, and had been lying to herself about it in both directions ever since. "Caleb Harding," she said, "you are the most stubborn, most circuitous, most thoroughly inconvenient man I have met in my entire life." "Yes," he said, "I know." "You rode past my window in the snow." "Several times, yes." "You wrote me 5 letters over 4 years." "I did." "And never once considered simply knocking on the door?" "I considered it," he said. "Extensively. I was working on it. For 4 years. I'm a thorough man, he said, and the corner of his mouth moved. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she closed the remaining distance and kissed him, and he kissed her back with the particular completeness of a man who has been saving that up for 4 years and intends to make the accounting accurate. When they separated, he rested his forehead against hers, careful of the ribs, and she had her hands on the front of his shirt, and he had his arms around her, and outside Redstone Crossing was going about its midnight business, knowing nothing about what was happening in the diner on the east side of the main road. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Good," she said, "because Eli is going to ask me tomorrow morning whether you're coming for chowder on days other than Thursday, and I'd like to give him a definitive answer." He pulled back enough to look at her. "Every day," he said.
"If that's all right with you." "It's all right with me," she said.
The weeks that followed rearranged themselves into a shape Dottie had not dared to anticipate and did not take for granted for a single day of them. Beckett was transported to Cheyenne in the second week of October, Rennick and Cruz alongside him, and the territorial court confirmed the dissolution of his easement claim on a Tuesday morning so unremarkable in its weather that Dottie almost missed it. The court order arrived on the same day as her flour delivery from Connolly's mill, which had resumed without explanation or apology and received neither. Pearl came to work at Callaway's stop on the Thursday after the arrest, walked in at 4:30 in the morning, put on an apron she had apparently purchased herself in anticipation of being asked, and began learning the biscuit recipe with the determined focus of someone settling a debt they take seriously. She was a quick study. By the second week, she had the proportions without measuring. Eli returned from the Briggs house with his bag and his wooden horse, and the expression of a child who has been informed that the crisis is resolved and is reserving judgment until he has verified this personally. He verified it by the end of the first day and became so thoroughly ordinary in his behavior afterward that Dottie understood he had been much more frightened than he had shown, and was now actively dismantling the evidence. Caleb came in on Thursday at the usual time and sat at the usual stool and ordered the usual chowder and left the usual 2-quarter tip. And then he came back Friday morning and Saturday and Sunday and the Sunday after that. And at some point between October and November, it stopped being remarkable to anyone in Redstone Crossing that the marshal ate at Callaway's stop most mornings and stayed sometimes past the end of service, helping Eli with his schoolwork at the end counter while Dottie finished the evening bread. Gus Wade made no comment on this for 3 full weeks, and then one morning said to Dottie, without any preamble, "I've been sheriff in this town for 11 years, and I've never once seen that man sit still in one place for longer than 40 minutes. And then went back to his eggs and said nothing else, which was as close to a blessing as Gus Wade's face was capable of expressing. In the first week of November, on an evening when the first proper snow had come down all day, and Eli was asleep upstairs, and Pearl had gone home, and the diner was cleaned and locked, Caleb sat at the counter while Dottie made the next morning's starter dough, and he said, without any particular build-up, "I want to ask you something." She kept her hands in the dough. "Ask?" "I want to ask you to marry me," he said. "I'm not asking yet. I'm telling you I want to, so you're not surprised when I do." She looked up. He was watching her with those eyes, open in the way they were now most evenings when it was just the two of them. The door he'd kept shut for 4 years, propped wide, and making no apology for it. "That is the most Caleb Harding way to propose that I can imagine," she said. "I told you, I'm thorough." "When?" she said. "When what?" "When are you planning to actually ask?" He considered this. "Soon," he said. "I'm working on the phrasing." She looked at him for a moment. "Caleb." "Yes?" "Stop working on the phrasing and ask." He looked at her across the counter, and he stood up, and he came around the end of the counter and stood in front of her with flour on his shirt from where she'd leaned against him earlier, and he said, "Dorothy Callaway,
"Will you marry me?" It was not precisely a question. It was the sentence of a man who has finally stopped asking the world for permission to want what he wants. Delivered plainly and without ornamentation by someone who had spent enough years on ornamentation and found it insufficient. "Yes," she said. "Obviously, yes." He kissed her, and she left flower on his collar, and outside the snow came down steady and indifferent and beautiful over Redstone Crossing, in the way snow does when it has no opinion about what it covers, and covers everything equally. They were married the following spring, on a Saturday in April, when the mud had dried enough to walk on, and the mountains had shed their winter, and the whole territory had the feeling of something beginning rather than something ending. Eli stood up with Caleb, and Pearl stood up with Dottie, and Gus Wade, in a development that surprised everyone including Gus, cried once briefly during the vows, and denied it with complete conviction afterward. The sign above the diner door, which had read Callaway's Stop since James Callaway built the place 6 years before, was repainted in May. It read the same name on the same board in the same place, because the name was right, and the building was right, and some things do not need to be changed to be made better. What changed was smaller and more important than a sign. What changed was that in the mornings, before the town woke up, there were 2 people in that kitchen instead of 1. And the bread that came out of the oven was the same bread it had always been, made the same way, by the same hands. And it was enough to eat, and it was enough to sell. And it was, in the way her mother had always said bread could be, love made solid, and hope made visible, held in human hands. Dorothy Callaway Harding had spent 6 years running a diner on the eastern edge of a small Wyoming town, feeding people who sometimes didn't look at her when they paid, taking up space in a world that had not always made space willingly available. She had been told, in ways direct and indirect, that what she was and what she had were insufficient, that she was too much in some directions and not enough in others, that the correct response to Harrison Beckett's clean boots and practiced smile was to take the money and become smaller. She had put a knife through that argument on a Monday morning in October 1882, and she had never reconsidered it, not once, not even in the weeks when reconsidering it would have been easier. She had not changed herself to survive. She had not made herself smaller to be loved. She had stood on the ground her husband built, and she had refused to disappear. And the world had arranged itself around that refusal in ways she could not have predicted and did not take for granted. Callaway's Stop served breakfast, lunch, and dinner 6 days a week for the next 31 years. It fed miners and merchants and widows and circuit judges and, on one occasion, a sitting United States senator who said afterward that it was the best biscuit he had eaten in 20 years of travel, and asked for the recipe, which Dottie declined to give him, on the grounds that some things were not for senators. Eli Callaway grew up to be a lawyer, which surprised no one who had watched him at 8 years old, filing away information with those serious eyes. He argued his first case in a Wyoming territorial court at 24, and won it. And he sent his mother a telegram afterward that read, "Remembered what you said about trouble not being the same as lost. Useful advice. Thank you." And on Thursday mornings, for 31 years, Caleb Harding sat at the end of the counter and ordered corn chowder and wrapped his hands around his coffee cup and was precisely where he had decided to be. He was never late. He never missed. He did not require a reason beyond the one he had, which was the same reason he had always had, and had simply run out of excuses to keep to himself. Some people take a long time to come through the door. The important thing, Dorothy Callaway Harding knew, was that they come through it. The important thing was that you were still standing on the other side when they did, unchanged and undiminished, and entirely yourself. The door open, the coffee on, the bread in the oven, and enough room at the counter for everyone who had finally found their way home.